telling you, it's like he's moving.
Somebody's here. Hey guys, it's me, Holly Madison. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to do something a little bit different. I want to tell you about the scariest night of my life. This was the night I stayed the night in the infamous murder house. You may have seen it in American Horror Story. It's very famous. Anyway, if you'd hit the like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. And let's get on with this story. So a little bit of a disclaimer off the top. Either you believe in paranormal activity or you don't. I'm not here to convince you. I'm just telling you my story and my experience. I'm honest about everything I've experienced, though I can't always explain what it is. So proceed with this story with caution, I guess. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Just either suspend your disbelief and have fun with this story, or if you're a believer, you might find it really interesting. So buckle up. Okay, so you might be familiar with the house from American Horror Story. It's a very famous little tourist attraction here in LA. If you look at it, I'm not trying to like shout the address or anything or dox anybody, but I will say if you type in murder house in Google Maps, it comes right up. Like that's how well known it is. And I always wondered if the house was actually haunted. Like I knew it was used in American Horror Story and I knew people were fascinated with it. And it's a creepy, old, beautiful, historic mansion. But I always wondered if it was really haunted. I had a chance to find out. We'll get to that and we'll get to why I was there. But let's start off with a little bit of the history about this house. We're gonna take it way back 120 years ago to Los Angeles and an area of town known as Country Club Park. It's called such because the LA Country Club, or as they called it, the LA Golf Club at the time, used to be there. It's since moved way west over to Holmby Hills since it was developed into a very upscale residential neighborhood full of beautiful, big houses. In 1902, a German-American architect named Alfred Rosenheim, we love him and we're gonna hear from him later, so remember him. He built this house, designed it himself, and over the course of 5 years, built this house for him and his family to live in, which they lived in for 11 years after. And this house is gorgeous. It's what they call Gothic college style house, which I've never heard of that style, but there you have it. It has a really distinct turret out front where the stairway is inside, and it has beautiful stained glass. It's brick, it's gorgeous. The inside has so many amazing details. There's intricate tile work. There's all kinds of woodwork. There's beautiful, priceless Tiffany glass doors. There's marble and tile fireplaces. It's just beautiful inside. After living in the house for 11 years with his family, Rosenheim sold the house to a man named P.J. McWaters, and he was known as the wealthiest man in California. He had a mining business in Mexico and would use the house as a getaway. Now, when I was doing research on the house, I saw they called the area of Country Club Park. Supposedly it was known as Billionaires Row back then, but I find that hard to believe. First of all, there weren't any actual billionaires back then. And when I was looking up who the first billionaire actually was, that led me down a whole Mandela effect rabbit hole. I made a TikTok about it, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, I mean, there's plenty of places around the country that people call Billionaires Row. There's like an area like the Colony in Malibu, they call Billionaires Row. You know, there's an area in New York called Billionaires Row. So there's not just one, but when I saw that supposedly this area is called Billionaires Row, I didn't really buy it, even though many of the neighbors were some of the wealthiest people in California at the time. The next owner of the house was an actor named Edward Everett Horton. He only lived there for 2 years. And this was around the time the house started being used in movies a lot. Supposedly it was in a Charlie Chaplin film. I can't find actual evidence of that. When people mention Charlie Chaplin, I tend to be a little bit skeptical. I call him the busiest ghost in Hollywood because when you hear all these like haunted Hollywood stories, so many places in town are supposedly haunted by Charlie Chaplin or Marilyn Monroe or Rudolph Valentino. Like those three get around. And I don't know if that's even possible for somebody's energy to be in that many places at once. I don't know, maybe it is. But also I think those are just recognizable old Hollywood names that people like to throw onto things. So you never know. In 1932, the house went from being a single family residence to being owned by a group of Catholic nuns. They were called the Sisters of the Social Service, and they had the house for quite some time. They held on to it until the 90s. They even added a giant chapel to the house. It's also brick, so it kind of blends in, but you won't see that on American Horror Story because that was digitally removed. But it's a huge space, a high 2-story ceiling. You get the picture. It's got like a loft for a choir. It's really big. And when I went through the house, that was kind of the one area I didn't really feel any energy. I don't know, maybe because it was a church, it was, kept light and airy, and any like more negative spirits were kept out. I don't really know, but that was kind of one area of the house where I didn't really feel anything. In 1946, the nuns actually annexed another mansion next door. So they had 2 properties, and there are not rumors, but there's speculation that maybe there could have been a tunnel between the 2 buildings, because when you go in the basement of the Rosenheim Mansion, there's something in the wall that looks like bricked up tunnels. We'll get to those later. So the big Northridge earthquake of 1994 damaged the home, and the nuns put it on the market for $3 million. But with so many years of nuns living there, an urban legend developed in the neighborhood. People would share a story about a supposedly pregnant nun who, being a nun, you're not really supposed to be pregnant, who allegedly jumped out the window to her death. Is it true? Is it not? Again, we'll get to that later. But that was the urban legend going around. After the nuns sold the mansion, a new owner put a state-of-the-art recording studio inside the chapel area. The house was used as a filming location for so many different TV shows, most notably Buffy the Vampire Slayer, before we get to American Horror Story, of course. And at one point in the past, it was put on the market for $17 million, which is hella steep, even for a huge Southern California, LA home. So it might have been a crazy pocket listing, like somebody just wanted to brag, oh, my house is supposedly worth this much, so they'll put it on the market for some crazy amount, hoping maybe they'll get that, or that it'll make a splash and get some press or something like that. I mean, I love that house. I think it's amazing. I think it's gorgeous, but not quite a 17 million yet. Although with the way these housing prices are going, might not be long. In 2011, big things were going to happen to this house when Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk scouted it. I hope I said his last name right, Falchuk. Anyway, they scouted it for American Horror Story Murder House, the very first season, and they knew that that was the house. They said it had personality. You can feel the energy when you walk into the house. They said not anything malevolent, but you can just feel the energy, and they knew it was going to be the star of the show. So the pilot was shot on location, both exteriors and interiors of the house, but the rest of the season, the interiors were shot on a soundstage, a set that was created to look exactly like the interior of the house. I was surprised when I first got to go in. I was like, oh my God, it's just like it. It's so cool. Even Evan Peters, one of the actors from American Horror Story, said the whole atmosphere is really terrifying and that he would not want to live in that house. The house was also used in American Horror Story Season 8. In 2015, the house was purchased for $3.2 million. Quite a drop from that $17 million listing. But it sold for $3.2 million to the current owners, who are a very lovely family. And in 2018, they actually sued both the former owner and the Coldwell Banker representatives that sold them the house. So the lawsuit was because allegedly they weren't informed about the house's history on American Horror Story, and so many fans would come and visit the house regularly. There's people, just any day you go by that house. I mean, I have to admit, I've been one of them. I've taken pictures outside of there even before I was invited to go inside. I love that stuff too. I get it. But also, you want to be respectful when you go look at these properties, especially when it's somebody's home. And, it's a lot for the owner to deal with, especially if they have a family and, they want to feel secure and everything like that. So it was a lot. And as you can see in this picture I took, they had to put kind of this ugly chain link fence out front because the neighborhood is a historic preservation area. The house was actually designated an historic home, which has its own sets of rules and regulations that go along with it. Like usually when your home has historic status. You have to get approval to do any kind of renovation or anything like that because you're supposed to keep the look of it intact, which I love because I love historic things. I love old homes. I love all the preservation, but sometimes the rules I think can get a little counterproductive. For example, since this is a historically preserved area, none of the houses in the area are allowed to put up any kind of fence. So for practical purposes, they had to put up like the temporary chain link fence, but it's ugly. Like the city can't just let the owner put up like a beautiful, nice fence for their own security, like a beautiful fence of their choice that's maybe of the period. But no, I guess the rule is because back in the day when those houses were built, there weren't fences. They can't have fences, which is kind of impractical. So really all that rule is doing is making the neighborhood ugly by making it so people have to put up ugly chain link fences. It's just kind of annoying. In 2020, when we were all locked down during the pandemic, the family who owns the house, they weren't living in it. They lived somewhere else. They're like, we want to restore this place back to its former glory. And there was a lot of work to be done. But they decided, there's this pandemic going on. Let's do something fun for the neighborhood. So they decked it all out Halloween style for everybody to look at. And they had some fun events and they gave away tickets to the events. They had like a live stream and they had like a little investigation and a seance. And when I was hearing about this stuff online, I was really intrigued and I wondered, is this place really haunted? Because obviously I knew about it from American Horror Story. I knew it was a beautiful old historic home. I knew it looked creepy, but I'd never actually heard of it being haunted before. But they're doing all this stuff like seances and having people sleep in the basement. And I'm like, I want to know. So last summer, I was very lucky. I had the chance to stay the night and do an investigation in the house. It was filmed for a show and I wish you guys could see the footage, but the footage is in limbo. I find that really annoying. The whole process of like that show and how good it turned out and how you can't see it is really frustrating to me. And maybe one day I'll tell that story, but I wish I could show you guys. I love YouTube though, because I can sit here and I can tell the story and I can share the story. So the day of the sleepover started with my friend Bridget. You know her from Girls Next Door. We went to go meet the owner, who is absolutely lovely and took the time to give us a tour through this house. And this house is huge. So we were walking around and we were filming it, so I wanted to look good. So I wore these like Balenciaga zip up spike heel, pointy-toed boots, and that wasn't a good idea because this was a long tour because we wanted to film every single room. And I did, like if you watch my Girls Next Door reaction videos, I'm a stickler for continuity. So I didn't want to change halfway through into my combat boots and like have it be cut weird. So I'm sitting here suffering, and I kid you not, some of my toes were numb the next day. Like this was not a smart decision. Anyway, so she took us through the whole house. We started in the chapel. The chapel was kind of the one place I didn't really feel any strange energy, but you could feel it in a lot of the other rooms. Sometimes if you're sensitive to this kind of thing, you can walk into a room and you just kind of feel it. And the best way I have to describe it is it almost feels like the air is extra heavy and almost like it's pushing in on you. And I felt that in a lot of the rooms, especially this room that was painted blue upstairs that the owner told us was allegedly the room where the nun had jumped off the balcony that extends from that room. So I really connected to this story, as a mother and as somebody who struggled with depression, this story, which I didn't know if it was true or not, but this story about a nun who could have been pregnant and suffering from depression and having these kind of thoughts. I was really touched by that story. I don't know if touched is the right word, but saddened. I don't know what the right word is, but the story kind of like pulled on my heartstrings a little bit. So I wanted to try and find out a little bit more about that, if we could possibly investigate it. But the scariest part of the house was definitely the basement. This house is huge and the basement underneath it is gigantic. I would say there's probably at least 3 separate huge areas to the basement. And when we went on our first tour, one of the rooms Bridget and I walked into, she's like, do you hear that sound? And we all got quiet and I could hear it. It was like a heavy, creepy breathing sound. that I couldn't really explain. It was like, I make these noises and I'm like, I hope somebody doesn't take this out of context. And they're like, have a clip of me like, but it wasn't so funny in the moment. There was all kinds of weird, outdated equipment down there, which makes it extra creepy. And then she showed us a crawl space. This crawl space led into a separate area of the basement that had pretty much been walled off. Like it looked like a wall had been added later. And then you can see into this area. This is the view in the basement as you're looking in through the crawl space opening. And there were these brick arches that had been bricked up. And even the owner didn't know were these tunnels. I see the coffee can in the corner. Bridget, you have to come up here and see this. It's so crazy. I mean, if I knew there was a way to get back out, like when you told me about the secret tunnels, I was like, yeah, I'm going in. But I mean, if somebody, which is extra creepy to think about, because if you put someone in here, they couldn't really climb out. I did a TikTok about it and somebody suggested in the comments, maybe back in the day, the kitchen was in the basement and maybe those were ovens, but I didn't see any type of chimney or any outlet coming out. Not that those couldn't have been taken away, but I don't necessarily think those were ovens. Even people on the crew, like one of our producers was saying, you know, I don't necessarily believe in all this stuff, but I'm telling you, I walked up onto the 3rd floor of that house and I felt like someone was pushing my chest. Like everybody was feeling it in this house. Another really interesting thing to note was, like I said, they really want to renovate and restore the house. And of course, the kitchen was still functional. Like there was still like a fridge and stuff that we put our coffees in and everything. But a lot of it was tore up. A lot of it was covered up. And of course, renovations on a house, if you know anything about paranormal, can often cause things to be stirred up because if spirits are there, especially spirits that feel really attached to the house or maybe that lived in the house while they were alive, can be kind of confused when this stuff is going on. It often helps to try and communicate with the spirits and let them know what you're doing ahead of time and let them know that you're trying to preserve the house. So that was another thing that was possibly adding to what was going on. Now, we also had a medium come join us, but we didn't want him to be there for the initial tour of the house. We didn't even want to tell him where we were bringing him. We were like, we are sending a driver. You're basically going to be blindfolded and taken to a mystery location because we didn't want him doing any research on the house beforehand because we wanted to know that the information he was getting, if that fell in line with anything we knew from the research we had done on the house or from what the owner had told us. You know, it's exciting if it matches up. If he hasn't done any research on the house and he's like, oh, they're saying this, and the date and the name lines up with things you've already learned about the house, that really helps verify it for me. So before our medium arrived, we did interviews with a few people that the owner was kind enough to source for us, like somebody who had worked security outside. We were hearing all kinds of crazy ghost stories, none of which really come into play later, but there would even be stories of like ghost dogs. People would hear these dogs always barking at one end of the property, but there were never any dogs. But anyway, while we were doing these interviews, we kept hearing so distinctly above our heads furniture being moved, like somebody was dragging a bed across the thing. And I kept looking over at the producer like who's up there? You know, like, what are they doing? Like, we're trying to do this interview. And he's like, there's nobody up there. So we went and verified that there was absolutely nobody up there. But as we kept continuing our interviews, we just kept hearing furniture move across, and the owner's just like, this is how it is. This is how it happens. You know, we've heard this before. And I've had that happen at houses I've lived at. I would hear, and like babysitters would hear, like if you were there late at night and you were in one of the bedrooms downstairs, you would hear like the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor in the living room, even though nothing was moving. It's really weird. So after we were done with our interviews, our friend Joe Peretta arrived. He's a really amazing medium. And when he got out of the car, I'm like, do you recognize the house? He's like, oh yeah, I know what house this is. Like, I've seen it on American Horror Story, but he didn't know anything about the actual house and like the history of the house itself. So we were really excited to get started. And he said even on the way there, he was sensing different energies because he's done this before. He's done investigations where he goes places. And he says even when he's on his way or even when he's been told that he is going somewhere, like the spirits will start to come in even before. And he was sensing a really negative male energy and also kind of a motherly female energy. So we were really excited to find out who those people were. You guys, I don't know how much I want to tell you because like I want you guys to see the footage too, and I don't want to give it away, but I don't know if you'll ever see the footage. Anyway, the first thing we did was go up to the room on the 3rd floor where the nun supposedly jumped out the window. And some interesting things started happening. We were sitting in a circle on the floor, like Joe was trying to connect, you know, Bridget was using a spirit box. I was holding this FLIR camera and I had it pointed at the door and I could see one of the producers standing in the doorway. So she wasn't moving because I'm staring at this thing looking for anything else, but I could see that she wasn't moving. And all of a sudden the case that was on the protective case on the front of the thermostat just bounced off the wall and clattered to the floor. And I know nobody touched it because I saw the producer standing right there and she didn't move. So that was the first thing. The messages that Joe was getting when he was connecting with the spirits in the room, it wasn't so much words, it was more like feelings. Like the female energy who was trying to communicate with him was feeling dread. Like they would be up in their room and then he's like, I'm hearing like a heavy breathing from a man, a male who used to spend time here. And then this female energy is feeling dread. Like she's anticipating abuse, like kind of like if you were at home in an abusive situation and that person's coming home, you get that pit in your stomach. The medium was getting the feeling like, oh my God, he's home. Like, you know, when you're almost like bracing yourself. Ugh. And it was just even talking about it with him in that room, like it felt so real to me. Also, one of the words we got on the spirit box was priest, which is pretty specific considering we're in a former nunnery. When things quieted down in that room, we moved on to another room on the 3rd floor that had like these weird closets, and the closet had like a weird creepy crawl space into an attic, which I have this disgusted look on my face because I'm kind of like remembering the moment and remembering how creepy everything was. But I actually love this stuff. Like give me a house with a secret passage, a troll door, a crawl space, a panic room. Like that is my vibe. I love it. But I'm cringing right now because I'm just remembering how creepy it was. We sat in this extra room and we set up a REM pod, which is this little round device, will light up and beep. And you can try and communicate with spirits through that. You can set up a system and say beep if yes, if no, stay silent, or beep twice if yes. You have to like communicate and set up what the code is basically, or you're not going to know what answers you're getting. But anyhow, we set up a pretty good system with it and we're asking all kinds of questions, getting answers, plus working with Joe to see what he was picking up on. And he was picking up on a German name. And we're like, the architect was German, the man who built it and the man who lived in the house for the first 11 years that it existed. And he started getting a message that that man wanted a certain tile preserved in the house. And I'm like, okay, where's this tile? Because, you know, we want to bring back some kind of an answer for the owner. She's kind enough to let us into her home and we want to bring back some kind of an answer for her or some kind of knowledge about what might be going on in her house. I'm like, why don't we walk around and you just kind of follow your instinct and see where we go and we'll find this tile and figure out what it is, because we're asking questions and we weren't really getting a clear answer as to what exact tile he wanted saved. So we ended up in the kitchen and started tearing away at this tarp that was taped up, and underneath some materials we found this really beautiful original tile, and we set the REM pod on that and we're like, is this the tile? Yes, it was. So we felt like we accomplished something and found something and had something to take back to the owner. Like, be sure you keep this tile because it'll keep the original owner very happy. Next, we tried the nursery because the owner had had some experiences with her children in the nursery, which I thought was kind of unsettling because, you know, it's just, even if you don't feel like what's in the house is necessarily malevolent, it's always a little unsettling when kids are involved. So we sat in the nursery for a while, tried to communicate, weren't really getting anything, weren't really feeling anything. And then I suggested we just sit on the landing of the main staircase inside the turret that you see from out on the street and see what we get. You know what? I'm telling the story and it's like the night we were there, well, the day, because it started at 5 p.m. and we left probably around sunrise. So we were there for a good 12 hours. And there were so many things that happened. I'm not even going to be able to remember it because as I'm talking about moving onto the stairway, I'm like, I didn't tell you guys about the American Horror Story fan who has come to by the house to visit so many times. And we saw her outside and she told us about how she saw like a woman in the top floor window who like disappeared right in front of her eyes when nobody was home. And it's just like all these stories we were getting, it was just a ton of stuff. So I'm just kind of keeping it to the stories where I really felt involved and I really felt like there was a through line and a payoff. Like, oh my God, we actually found this original piece of the house that the original owner wants the new owner to keep. You know what I mean? So finally, after hours and hours of avoiding it, Joe felt like he was being called to the basement. So we finally went down to the basement, and as you enter near the back stairway, you can already feel the energy in that house. It gets so heavy right around that back stairway. So we went down to the basement. We thought about going in the crawl space. We actually didn't, because by the time we were in the basement, because we'd been doing a lot and the night was flying by, and sometimes when you're doing an investigation, like when you watch these shows on TV, you're just seeing the highlights of a whole night. You're not seeing like the 2 hours that you sit in one room and you're not getting anything. You know what I mean? So I felt like this house was a jackpot, because when we were there, we got like 3 completely separate storylines that you could possibly go with, which is amazing. Even though we got that lucky, there's still a ton of downtime where like nothing's happening, and that's kind of the stuff you don't see on TV. So by the time we actually got to the basement, we didn't have that much time left because we wanted to finish by sunrise. The owner was coming back and she wanted some answers. So there were 3 main areas in the basement where we tried to communicate. One area, which is the area attached to the crawl space, was the one we gave up on the most. We just weren't feeling it. The first room we sat in, we got so much stuff. I had one of those cameras where you see like the little stick figure where there's not a person standing in front of you, but the camera will pick up like a little stick figure. And I had that, we were all sitting in a circle, and I had it kind of pointed toward Bridget. And, you know, we had the REM pod in the middle. By the way, before I keep forgetting, like there's so many things. I could do an hour-long video on this if I had been more organized, but I like to just sit down and chat with you guys. Before I even talk about it, because I was going to say we had a REM pod in the middle of us again, and it was going crazy, like just beeping like crazy and just going off like crazy. And Joe felt like what he was picking up on is that we were connecting with the most negative of all the spirits in the house, the spirit of the man that he had been picking up on, the man that comes into the house and makes the female feel dread. And this REM pod was going off like crazy, and Joe was like, they're trying to get us to stop. Like they're trying to get us to not talk to them anymore. They're trying to drain everything. And when I was getting ready to tell that part of the story, it reminded me that our equipment batteries were dying like crazy. Like it's kind of a trope in the paranormal world that like your batteries will drain and like you need to bring extra batteries, make sure everything's charged up, bring your chargers, all the things. Because one of the thoughts is that if there's a spirit in the room, in order for them to manifest or do anything, they have to draw the energy from somewhere, and they can draw it from batteries or electronics, supposedly. That's just a theory. Okay, when I tell you that I packed all our equipment myself and I triple checked that they were charged and I brought extra batteries and all the things were dying right away. Like I'd use something for like 5 minutes and it'd be dead. And I was like, this is a brand new piece of equipment. I tested it out. I made sure it was charged. And then I would take it downstairs, charge it again until it's fully charged, try to use it again. Not working. And not only that, but our camera crew's batteries were dying like crazy. Like we were able to film all night, but barely. So yeah, it was almost a joke. Like I could laugh about it. Like it sounds like I'm just leaning too hard into a trope where it's like, oh, the ghost drained our batteries. No, I've never seen anything like it. So anyway, back to the basement. We were there with the REM pod, which is going off like crazy. Like I thought this thing was going to explode. It was just going nuts. And Bridget was trying to work with the spirit box, and she was asking something to touch her. But before she asked, I was sitting there with that camera on her, and I was telling her that I kept seeing something, like a little stick figure, and you could see, like there were beams in front of me, that were in front of like another like room off the side of the room we were on. And you could see this little figure of like a guy like creepy crawling up the beam. And like he would like kind of hang out in the corner. And then I was like, ew, Bridget, he's on you. Because like if I'm Bridget, this little stick figure guy was like crawling like this. And right when he was on her, she was asking, can something touch me? And she felt something touch her hand, but nothing was there. So we were getting a ton of activity in that room in the basement, but we weren't really getting any answers. And we just desperately wanted to finish the night with some kind of an answer for the owner. So we went into the smallest room in the basement, which, by the way, it had like a creepy storage closet off to the side. And for some reason, when I'm thinking about that closet right now, I'm getting the worst chills. Sorry, I had to pause. So, like, I want to tell you guys everything, but I'm also aware that I'm putting this on the internet and people are going to think I'm nuts. But sometimes if you're like connected with spiritual things or feel like you are, you can feel like certain areas are kind of calling to you. And even though I didn't feel like that storage closet was a huge part of our investigation, though we did hear a weird story from the owner, like, her husband's not a believer, but even he had an experience in that closet that was so weird, he had to tell us about it. But we weren't really getting any action out of that closet that night. But just thinking about it now, I just felt so creeped out in a way that I haven't felt before when thinking about it. I don't know, maybe I'm just putting myself too much in the moment, talking about it again. But yeah, anyway, we're all sitting in a circle in that room. The REM pod was going off like crazy. And Joe was just getting clearer messages from the mail, and we were asking questions over the spirit box. And the conclusion we came to, I'm weird about sharing this because we're talking about, even though I'm not giving out names and I haven't done the extra research to be like, okay, who are the suspects? Like, who could this have actually been? Because I don't know if that's really the important part to know. And how could you ever, you could never prove it anyway. I just feel like I'm talking about a real place where real people lived. But trigger warning, there was just talk of like abuse and sexual abuse and a man coming over and victimizing a woman or more than one woman and manipulating a woman. And the messages Joe was getting was that this spirit feeds on the energy and feeds on the energy of children. So I was super grossed out. And when we were talking about possibly, is there anything we could do to get rid of the spirit? Joe was just hearing laughing. Like there was no way, like nobody could ever get rid of me, coming from the spirit. And as we wrapped our investigation up, we talked with the owner on camera. We gave her the stories. We each gave her our opinion. And when I was talking to the producer later about the edit, I was like, I can't tell this woman, as a mom, I can't tell this woman it's safe to move in here. She's going to have to either live somewhere else and just keep this as kind of like a second home or like a hobby. Like if this is like a restoration project, like I'm not saying it's not possible to go live there or that she couldn't cleanse the house in some way. But I'm just saying, hearing what I heard that night and being a mom, like I can't tell another mother, yeah, you're free and clear to live here. Like, what is that? There's no way. And I know there was some talk about, like maybe they could move back there, but maybe just like the basement is sealed off and they can't ever go in the basement. Can you imagine growing up in a house and you can't ever go in the basement? Like it's one thing to grow up and be kind of like scared of the basement and not want to go down there. Maybe you don't go down there out of choice, like Home Alone style. But knowing there's a big creepy basement underneath you and knowing you are not allowed to go down there, like that is just so sinister. So I don't know how the edit played out or if you will ever see it or what the conclusion was at the end. But I'm telling you right now, like as a mom, I could not tell anybody like it's okay and it's safe for your kids to go back there. And don't get me wrong, like, this is a real person. So if, for some reason you're getting a little too close to this situation and you're trying to figure out who owns the house, and if you ever find out in the future they are living there with the kids, like don't be judgy. Like I'm not saying you can't ever figure it out or the energy can't go away, or some people don't even believe in this stuff, and maybe we weren't even getting the full story, who knows. I'm just saying that I can't say, like, hearing what I heard and just being there that night and we did this investigation, I can't go and say, oh, we investigated, you're good to go, bring your kids. Like, I can't say that. That's not responsible. I'm so grossed out by the idea that there was this malevolent spirit of this man who was doing bad things to people, and he feeds off the energy of children. Like, I can't tell somebody to go live in the house. I mean, maybe they will. I hope, everything turns out good, and I hope everybody's happy. I'm just saying that after what I experienced that night, I can't say, yeah, go do it, so I don't know. how the edit ended up or if anybody will ever see it. But that was my scary night at the American Horror Story house. And I feel like I just skimmed over the story, and I feel like there's so many more things, and I'll probably remember so many little instances after I turn the camera off. But I hope you guys were entertained by it, and I hope I can share more scary stories with you. Let me know if you would like to hear more. I can tell you every house I've lived in as an adult has been haunted, so I've got tons of stories for you. If you want to hear another haunted mansion story, there was a famous place I lived for a while. I can't say the name of it because if I say the brand name, like YouTube flags my videos. But if you want to hear stories about that place being haunted, I could do a video on that. So let me know, and be safe, and don't let the creepy spirits get your kids. Bye.